Well, good morning to you. Welcome to another in the series of our legislative breakfast brought to you by the Bridport Grange and Addison County Farm Bureau with help from the Addison County Regional Planning Commission and the Addison County Chamber of Commerce. We each week get together and talk about legislative issues and what's going on in the legislative session, and this week is no different. We've only got a couple more of these sessions after this. Hopefully the legislature will get done their work and go home, and a lot of you are looking forward to having that finished so we know where we as citizens can head with the new legislation that is being proposed. So with that, I'll ask each legislator to come up to the microphone, introduce themselves, let us know where they are in their process, and move on from there. And if I see Chris Bray heading for the microphone. Senator.
Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I live in New Haven. I serve in the Senate. I chair Natural Resources and Energy in the morning, and I serve on Government Operations in the afternoon. The Senate has, as I just mentioned, morning and afternoon committees. Morning committees are wrapping up this week. Actually, I've asked for a couple extra days because there are some bills in our hopper, but we have a lot of work to finish up on forestry, water quality, and toxic substances in the next 8 days. Thank you,
Dave.
Good morning. I'm Representative Dave Sharp from Bristol. I represent Bristol, Lincoln, Starksboro, and Moncton. It's my 14th year in the legislature, and I serve as chair of the Education Committee. We have seen really exciting action under Act 46, school districts coming together into larger integrated school districts. We're right in the middle of one here in Middlebury. We have 2 votes coming up this week, 2 of the tougher areas, I think, to move forward, so it'll be interesting to see how these votes turn out.
Amy?
Good morning. I'm Amy Sheldon. I represent Middlebury, and I serve on House Fish, Wildlife, and Water Committee. In committee, we sent a number of bills over to the Senate. Last week, we started looking at the solar siting bill. We're not going to have possession of that bill, but we will weigh in on aspects of it. We also started taking testimony on toxics related to the North Bennington PFOA water contamination. And on Friday, I actually was in Washington, D.C. with the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators getting a briefing on the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, which has marketed a dirty deal. It's not a good thing, so if anyone has questions about that, I'd be happy to talk about it. I think that's it for me for now.
Betty?
Representative Betty Nuovo, Middlebury. I represent Middlebury. I'm on the Judiciary Committee. And we have a lot of Senate bills that are going to be taken up in the next few weeks.
Senator?
Good morning. My name is Claire Eyre. I represent all the towns of Addison County as well as Huntington and Buellscore in the Senate. This is the end of my 7th term. I plan to run again. I chair Senate Health and Welfare in the morning and sit on Finance in the afternoon. So in the afternoon, we're finishing up tax bills and insurance bills and utility bills. In the morning, we've finished up our opioid bill. We're working on a bill that tries to tie together a lot of healthcare concepts that will lead toward better care, helping to decrease the paperwork, for example, for primary care docs. It's getting out of hand. And to line up different insurance requirements so that the whole process goes smoother. It's a lot of paperwork. It really is. And trying to finish up the budget implications for healthcare, especially mental health.
Thank you. Fred?
Good morning. Fred Baser, Bristol, Starksboro, Moncton, and Lincoln, along with Dave Sharp. And in terms of activity, last week we passed out of the House a workforce housing bill, which hopefully will move the needle in terms of construction for homes for those folks just a little bit above affordable. We also passed an economic development bill, maybe a couple of features of which I like concerning extending what they call VEGI, which basically is a program for employment training for companies that are growing in size, additional employees. And there's also a special piece in it about veterans. Veterans that are applying for economic development grants and programs from the state will be given a little preferential treatment versus other applications, which we thought was a good thing for our vets. And this week, I think tomorrow, a telecommunications bill will be on the floor. Good news and bad news with that. Good news, there's monies being set aside to help schools with internet access and speed access within our schools, which we think is certainly vitally important to our young people, given the new economy and what's going on in the world, and exposing them to the best economic information that they can get through the internet. And the bad news is, in our efforts to extend internet coverage to those difficult spots, those boroughs and communities that are tucked away in the hillsides that don't have internet coverage, everyone's phone rates might go up by $3 or $4 or $5 this year if the House approves the measure. We've looked always to users of internet services and phone services to raise money to get telecommunications out to all Vermonters, and this we hope is a final step with a limited 5-year increase of 0.5% to the telephone tax.
Thank you, Fred. So we're open for questions. I know that when we left you last week, there were a lot of questions still pending on S230, which was the solar siting bill. And if you want to continue that discussion, that's fine with us. Mr. Bovin.
Paul Bovin, Addison. Last week we were at Weybridge, and I mentioned the fact that I was kind of dismayed and disheartened by the fact that there seems to be a double standard between the city and the country. In the country, we have to have a working septic system. We can't have any water coming to the surface. And the fact being that we can't develop, you can't do anything with any lot unless you have a working septic system. Yet I read in the paper time and time again, you got almost every city in the state of Vermont has development going on. They build more houses and they still got poop going directly into the rivers and streams. Now, why is it in the country we can't do anything with that lot when there's no ability to handle a septic, yet in the cities, they're not handling the septic right now, and they're still allowing more development, more creation of quote-unquote more jobs and more pollution, when in the country, we can't do that. Now, my simple suggestion is that if you've got in the country, we have to pay $40,000 to $60,000 for a working septic system. That's easy enough. Assess every property in the city $40,000 to $60,000, and maybe they can afford to take care of their sewage problem and stop the development in the cities till they correct their septic problems.
Any legislators wish to address that? Senator?
Thank you for the question. Last year we passed a Clean Water Act, and the Vermont Clean Water Act, and so this won't be an answer exactly to what you're pointing out. I think there is a long-term answer to the problem you're pointing out, which is that we have wastewater treatment plants around the state that need upgrading. A lot of them were built 30, 40, 50 years ago, and they need additional infrastructure investment before they can perform at a higher level and allow for additional development in areas. I am aware, for instance, I'm just thinking back in Bristol, where there was a new, I think it was a restaurant that wanted to move into downtown. It was actually not allowed because the town's wastewater treatment system could not handle the additional load of another commercial kitchen. So I think there are mechanisms that measure and keep that in check. But the biggest challenge we have ahead of us is that significant wastewater treatment and storm sewer investments that are really going to be throughout the state, big cities and small.
Amy?
So we did pass, I thought Chris might touch on this, but there's a bill that will bring notification to recreational users of waters that do get subject to the combined sewer overflows. And that is a way of bringing awareness to the issue so more people are to sort of build interest in political will to address the very expensive problems that we do need to address. I think that you also need to know when we're treating and there's a combined sewer overflow, the fact is it also indicates that stormwater is getting treated at many of the lower flow storms. And so it's only they get triggered at the high flow events. So the majority of the stormwater in those communities with the overflows is getting treated during the smaller events, and that is a huge step forward. Doesn't mean we don't need to deal with the overflows. We absolutely do, and we need to find creative ways to do it. I hope that you're going to find in the next year or two that we come up with better ways, more holistic ways of addressing our sewage problems, in particular in the cities. Look to hopefully some kind of demonstration project like we're doing with workforce housing in a city treatment plant that's having problems. Can't guarantee that, but I think I'm feeling that vibe around the State House. People are ready to do something different and address the problem.
More questions, comments?
Hi, I'm Dave Silverman. I'm an attorney in Middlebury. I've been at the last several of these. I've been raising the same issue of marijuana legalization. I'm going to bring it up again. Last Friday, the House Judiciary Committee voted against an amended marijuana bill that would not have legalized marijuana at all, but would have simply reduced the criminal penalties currently on the books for marijuana. And Representative Novo, you voted against a bill that would have reduced the penalty for growing 25 marijuana plants from 15 years. 15 years is the penalty given in Vermont for manslaughter. Manslaughter. That is the same penalty given to growing 25 plants. Representative Nova, you voted against that. I'm struggling to understand why you might think that 25 marijuana plants is as dangerous to our society as manslaughter.
One of the things that happened on Friday was that we were presented with a brand new bill that none of us had seen. We had to be on the House floor at certain times. There was roll calls and everything else. We got some testimony, maybe 15 minutes from the Legislative Council, and then we had to vote. None of us had read the bill. You can't read a 20-page bill in 2 seconds. It was up for vote. I will not vote on a bill I have not read.
Other questions? Do you want to go back to S230?
My name is John Cristiano. I'm from New Haven. When we left this off last time, part of the discussion was about accountability from the new committee or department, wherever it's been set up, to report back to towns regarding their desires and wishes in the process. It can eat it. Okay, that's better. The statement was that that the committees or the department would report back to the towns on where the whole process stood. I want to take exception to the comment in particular that Senator Bray made and just give you a little bit of feedback on what's gone on previously, and in my opinion is going to be repeated ad nauseum down the road. The town of New Haven probably kicked this off, opposition to solar arrays, as much as anybody. We had a group from the Public Service Board 3 people that they sent down to stick a lollipop in our mouth at the Congregational Church. It was quite a large turnout. And as a result of that, and there's a YouTube video of all of this, so if anybody wants to check on what I'm saying, that's fine, where they said that they would analyze all this information and our concerns and get back to us. That never happened. I don't expect that it ever will. And I guess as a measure of good faith, I would ask you, Senator, come up with a letter of where they ever got back to us in any fashion or responded in any way whatsoever. This is just one more instance, in my opinion, of government agencies and personnel sweeping the concerns of the voters under the table and into the trash bin.
Senator.
So I'll be happy to, after the meeting, talk with John and get the details to make sure that my inquiry to the Public Service Board is accurate. So I don't know what their formal response to date has been. If it's the same meeting I was at the Congregational, well, I'll get details after the meeting. S230, the major point of S230 is it gives Vermonters, towns, and regional planning commissions a far greater voice in how we move from fossil fuel generation to clean renewable fuels. And it's a transformation that's going to be going on for decades. Towns have said loudly that they'd like to have a greater voice, and the path that this bill proposes is to bring towns into the planning process as opposed to the state making a plan for the entire state and not engaging regions and towns in figuring out that future. So this is, to me, one of those cases where failing to plan is planning to fail, to use an old saying. And the failure is that if Vermonters do broadly support the move to renewable energy, and yet we're having conflicts on projects. So this bill gets at the heart of why there's a conflict, and I think that's because the existing way of doing it doesn't bring towns into a balanced, a meaningful dialogue with regional planners and the state. Under the current law, town plans are given consideration, due consideration. Under the new plan, they are given deference. So in other words, towns will have a far greater level of influence, and they gain that influence by being part of figuring out how we make this transition. I think we're in a uneasy phase of changing the way we do things, but I do firmly believe that we will, if we enter into this work with genuine goodwill on both sides, that we will see great progress. The other thing is that I should mention, it gets confusing, the different departments down there, is the Department of Public Service, not the Public Service Board, that will be working with towns and regions on their town plans.
More questions? Another S230 question.
Last time I asked Senator Bray to comment on Senator Stark's comment about this bill, and he said he'd not seen it. Have you seen it yet?
So when I got back to the State House, I asked Senator Starr what you might have been alluding to. I'm still not sure. And he said, of course, he supported the bill. He voted for the bill. And that if this came up again at a legislative breakfast, he said, well, why don't you place a call to me on speakerphone and we could just sort it right out. So we could do that now, or we could do that after the meeting.
Well, I'd like to read what I was referring to in the VT Digger. And it starts by quoting him, "My whole problem with this system is that we're going to give communities the false idea it's going to be really changed from now on, and they're going to have some serious input into this siting. And I say they aren't going to have it, and we shouldn't be touting the idea we're doing this great bill to help our local communities, because I think we're leading them astray with false hope," Starr said at a Friday's Senate Appropriations hearing. "Having local plans go before the state entity headed by a political appointee would make local government subject, by extension, to the governor's political pressure, Starr said. You don't go get a fox to watch the fox that's backing up into the chicken coop back on the farm. Is he being severely misquoted here?
Well, it's referring to an appropriations conversation, and I know that appropriations considered a number of amendments to the bill, so, and I was, off in my own committee when that conversation happened, so I can't really knowledgeably comment on the approps work, but I'll stand by my original statement. The only way to get ourselves out of sort of an ongoing conflict between towns, regions, and the state on energy planning is to do that planning together. And as for having these plans overly subject to politics, if you read the bill in an early section, it spells out very clearly the statutes to which the planning must adhere. So these are not political statements. These are laws passed over the last 15 years, and we have a statutory obligation to make progress in meeting those statutory goals. So it's not a political program, it's a legislative and a legal mandate.
And last time you said that this bill is not about wind. I understand that there was a provision called the Blittersdorf provision that is no longer in it. And also I'd like to know what is the big concern over noise monitoring. It would seem to me, I keep hearing more and more concern from people about afraid of negative effects on their health from a potential wind turbine that could go up in their neighborhood or is up and causing other people to potentially have health problems. It would seem to me, if I was a legislator and we could put this subject to rest, we would want to do that rather than let this continue to grow and become an issue.
As for the Blittersdorf amendment, I don't know what that refers to. I haven't spoken to Mr. Blittersdorf for a couple of years. I didn't see any language brought forward in either in committee or on the floor that I could identify as something of interest to him in particular. On wind, there was a number of people were proposing to write into law basically on the floor. The idea was that we would start spelling out decibel levels and setback distances, how you would measure sound, all the rest. And it's acoustic engineering is a complex topic, and I'd say I'll speak for myself, but I think I can speak for all the members of the Senate. We're not qualified to spell out engineering specifications, and it wouldn't be productive to do that in legislation. So what we did do is there's the Public Service Board, which has retained engineers to look into this. There's an open docket on sound. It was not scheduled to be closed, so in the bill we proposed, actually, I'd say we are ordering that they close that docket and issue findings. We spelled out 5 specific criteria that they should address in their order, and it addresses every concern that was brought up on our committee related to sound. They are expert enough to do that work, and there's an orderly process underway, and we want a timely and explicit answer from the Department of Public Service and the Public Service Board.
I understand they have been monitoring noise for some time now on certain projects, and they have data, but it's not public.
Every project that is, every renewable energy project gets a certificate of public good, and as part of that certificate of public good, there are performance requirements. On wind turbines, there are sound levels, so I'll speak about the Kingdom County Wind Project. As part of their certificate of public good, for the first 2 years of operation, Green Mountain Power had to go out and place sound monitoring equipment once a quarter for 2 years running. So they ran 2 to 6 week long monitoring rounds at the site to ensure that they were operating within the allowable sound levels for that certificate of public good. They passed that test, and there was no further monitoring required. Subsequently, there was an icing event on rotors on the mountain that changed their aerodynamics, changed the noise level, and they did have a period of time that exceeded their allowed noise level. The Public Service Board ordered a full year, so 24/7, 365 additional monitoring at that site. That test, that monitoring is about to end, and they haven't released data along the way. They are collecting it, aggregating it, and it will be public information.
Can I interrupt for just a second? This is turning into a debate between two candidates for the Senate. While I appreciate that the election season has started early this year, I didn't think this was a format for a debate between candidates.
Yes, you are correct. If we could move on to another questioner.
I was trying to ask questions. I wasn't trying to get into a debate.
Okay. If there are other questions, and Paul, did you want to step up to the mic?
Good morning, I'm Paul Ralston. I'm the reluctant politician. I haven't decided if I'm running, so I don't think this will qualify as a debate. Are we okay?
Okay with me.
First of all, a lot of work's been done on S230. Senator Bray, I think if we were to take him at his word as what he's just said, everything's fine. Everything's hunky-dory, and no one has any problems. And I think we know that not to be true. I think there are problems, and I think they're trying to address these problems, but I think there's one key element of the renewable energy initiative that we all have to get our heads around, and that's the idea that in order to affect climate change, people are going to have to sacrifice. Now, there are some people who will profit from that sacrifice, and there are some who will just sacrifice and pay the price. This imbalance, I believe, is what is at the root of the discontent of Vermonters in the kingdom around wind and in Addison County around solar. In order to really evaluate who is making the sacrifice and for whom, you must look at the renewable energy credits portion of the energy program. You know how that works, right? The RECs, renewable energy credits, they have created this artificial portion of the energy, this divisible portion that is the credit. And that credit can be stripped away from the energy and sold separately. Now, right now, the vast majority of Vermont renewable energy projects are selling their RECs, and they are selling them out of state. What this means is that legally, the energy being produced no longer can be called renewable. Does everybody understand that difference? That there is the electrons and there's the profit. And we've stripped the profit, the money, away from the electrons. And we're selling those to other utilities, primarily in Massachusetts, some in Connecticut, so that they don't have to build out renewables, so that they can continue to burn natural gas for their electricity, so they can continue to produce nuclear energy. So Vermonters are being asked to sacrifice, but we're being asked to sacrifice so that Massachusetts meets its renewable energy goals, not Vermont. Do you get that difference? We're being used. We're being mined for our very lax, easy renewable energy laws and our very profitable renewable energy laws. That's why we have this activity. The activity is wonderful. Let's keep the RECs in Vermont, and that way a Vermonter who has to live next to a large solar installation, a Vermonter that has to hear a wind turbine, can know that that energy is meeting Vermont's renewable energy goals and not the renewable energy goals of Massachusetts. This disconnect is what's at the root of the problem, and citing alone is not the solution.
Thank you, Paul. Paul? The other Paul.
I do have a question, and that is where is S-230, the solar siting bill, in the House, and what are the prospects there? What committee has it, and are there going to be hearings? Is this going to move forward? I think it's a very important bill, and I think we should pass it.
Amy, can you give us an update?
That bill is in the possession of House Natural Resources and Energy, and I'm sure they're going to take it up immediately, probably took it up last week. And then, as I said, my committee will also be reviewing and considering making points on it. We will not have possession, so it's going to stay in the possession of House Natural Resources and Energy and I expect to be amended and voted out.
Yes.
Bob Zelo from Midport. I just want to talk about RECs. I'd like to talk about the RECs. There's been a lot of legalese about these. I've looked into them a little bit. I'm no expert. I'm not a lawyer. I believe the origins of renewable energy credits was put in place to have old energy help finance new energy. Old fossil fuel energy would buy credits and from the new technology, so they would be subsidizing the new solar, the new wind, whatever, and so the old fossil fuels would become more expensive. So it's a process of de-incentivizing the older fossil fuels and incentivizing the new renewable fuels. So it's not us versus them, and all this other stuff. It's a process now. It has been somewhat twisted in the legal prints. I mean, the legal aspect is when they buy the credits, they own it. But that doesn't mean that the energy produced by solar or wind or water or whatever is usually used locally. So the electrons don't fly around by some document to go someplace else. In fact, electrons actually don't move very far at all, okay? And, a few thousandths of an inch at most. So if you have a solar farm in New Haven, which there are plenty of them, you're probably providing power to the Cabot plant, okay, or Middlebury College or something like that. It's not going to Connecticut. So I'd like to separate the whole concept of these energy credits as some evil thing that Vermont is being abused or punished or whatever, okay? It is a way of bringing funds from fossil fuel plants to renewable, and the fact that Vermont businesses sell these credits to help finance their systems, I think that is a good thing. And that just doesn't mean that we shouldn't have better ways of siting, okay? This is a case where the solar and wind has gotten ahead of the legislation. When we see overbuilding in places, and it needs to come in balance. So it's a matter of the legislation catching up with the siting. And quite frankly, the Public Service Board, who's been the villain in all this, is a small board. And again, they have been overwhelmed by the events of the changing technology. Things need to change. This bill, S-230, I'm not sure, I've forgotten the number, is a step in the right direction. Is it the end? I don't think so, but we need to iterate towards it. And it's not a black and white issue. It needs to be thought through. It needs to be debated. I think doing local planning and regional planning is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Senator, I saw you standing. Did you want to comment on any of those?
Just two quick notes. Act 56, which we passed a year ago, changes creates a renewable portfolio standard in Vermont, so RECs will be retained in the future, starting January 1, 2017. It brings us into alignment with how RECs are treated in other New England states. In the prior year, we passed Act 99, which changes our net metering program, which also will be modified again. It starts January 1, 2017. how RECs are handled and how RECs are paid for.
Okay, we're back open for questions, comments. Mr. Bowman.
I think that the interesting thing is that when you take a look at it, it's, again, I think farmers, and most of us get sited on farmland, and farmers, interestingly, have an opportunity to glean anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 an acre for most of these solar arrays. And the fact of the matter is if we were paying what we should be for food, there'd be no question that probably we would be able to offset that, and there wouldn't be any competition because the farmland would be more valuable as farmland than it would be for solar siting. But such is not the case. The farmer pays his taxes, maintains the land, takes care of it, and everybody wants the view free of charge. And the thing is as I'm going to point out, is that if you like the view the way it is, you either going to, at some point, either going to want to say, I want to either pay for it, or I'm going to let him do what he needs to on his property. And I think that's another good rubbing point right there. The answer to the solution to the answer is give the farmers more income, pay more for your food. If it's worth more for energy as a solar collector, then guess what? That's where it's going to go.
Okay, more questions, comments? Other topics? Mr. Bovin.
The other Bovin. Mark Bovin, Addison. Last time in the last meeting, I raised my concern, and this is a continuation of it, is that people are going to the state, to the government, and for regulations and basically just to advance their personal interest or their causes or their agenda. One thing I raised last time was on the required agricultural practices require, as they're currently written, don't know whether it's 10-foot or 25-foot buffer on all the field ditches. Most of those field ditches were put in to control the water runoff, to reduce the water runoff and the sediment runoff, the soil runoff by the former Soil Conservation Service. If that buffer requirement stays, I can guarantee you that many farmers will go across those ditches with their plows, go across them with the harrows and wipe them out, and you're going to have much more runoff than you are now. Right now, the state, for some reason, and the people writing the regulations want to treat ditches as a source of pollution rather than a way of mitigating the runoff and the soil pollution and the runoff of phosphorus. I think it's part of the larger problem that people want to go to the government in order to push an agenda to save themselves, and the regulators, the rule makers, do not take into consideration all the factors and the evidence. Testimony is not evidence. Evidence has to meet certain standards, that it follows the means and methods of science. And I think we're getting a system of government where regulators are exerting too much power without consideration. Thank you.
Comments? Questions?
So I'm going to talk about a different topic. First of all, the last time I was here was beginning of February, and my name is Ruth Hardy. I'm the chair of the Middlebury ID4 School Board here in Middlebury. And I talked to all of you about Act 46 and the vote that we were going to have in our ACSU schools. And as most of you know, that vote passed overwhelmingly in all of our towns. And I just wanted to thank all of you for your support of that measure. It also passed up in Addison Northwest in the Virgins area school districts. And I know that Addison Northeast is working toward that goal as well. So I just wanted to thank all of you for that. We are excited. Mark Perrin's here, another school board member, and we're excited to move forward with our new school district very soon. I'm also here wearing a different hat. I'm the executive director of an organization called Emerge Vermont, and this organization recruits and trains and inspires women to run for public office. We are holding an event here in Middlebury this Saturday where we're celebrating women in elected office. A number of the people here are going to be involved in that event, including Senator Claire Ayer, Representative Betty Nuovo, and Representative Diane Lanfer. We will be talking about and celebrating women who are in elected office. We'll also have some local office holders, and we will also be presenting an Outstanding Public Service Award to Representative Betty Nuovo for her 30 years in the Vermont House. So if you would like to join, I would love to have more people from our local area there. You can go to emergevermont.org and reserve a seat. And finally, the last thing I want to say is that tomorrow is Equal Pay Day across the country, April 12th. That represents the day when women will have, it represents the day that number of days that women will have to have worked in order to have their pay be equivalent to men. Here in Vermont, women earn 86 cents on the dollar for men to men, and that's just a real problem when we talk about being able to support families and being able to have a vibrant local economy when women are not paid equally to men. I know that there's a lot going on at the State House tomorrow. The Vermont Commission on Women will be there talking about it. I've talked to Senator Bray. I know he's planning on speaking about this, and I just wanted to let you all know that it's really important that women are paid equally for the work that they do in our state. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments?
Heidi Willis, Salisbury. I feel like I'm speaking to the wall up here, but Ruth, I just wanted to respond to Act 46. I'm a retired teacher, and I felt like the situation that we were in was kind of a rock and a hard place. I voted for Act 46, not because I supported it, but because I felt like it was coming anyway. So my point is, I hope at some place, I really hope that people that are implementing Act 46 build in a time for evaluation, like 5 years down the road perhaps, and not only evaluating what's happening with schools, but what is happening in the broader community. I think I've made this point here at past breakfast that in my town of Salisbury, I'm feeling like we will lose town meeting because of Act 46, because our school budget was voted from the floor, but the town budget is not. So we'll work on that, but we'll see. And at any rate, in any new endeavor, it's good to look back and see how did it work? You know, what were the things that you didn't expect that are wonderful, and how are the things that you didn't expect that are not so wonderful? And I hope that evaluation would be broad, not just what's happening in the schools, but what's happening in the community. So, and thank you for all your hard work. I know it is a rock and a hard place.
Thank you, Heidi. Dave?
So a couple of comments. First about women in politics. So Cynthia Foligno was the first woman on the Bristol Select Board a number of years ago. She was not particularly welcome in that position. It was difficult for her to break the glass ceiling. But she did. And then we have had women on the select board since then, and we have an incredibly dynamic town administrator in Bristol, although it's not an elected position. She has been a real force in our community and has done some really good things. So seeing women get involved in politics is really a good thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about was we are working on this session a special education bill, and one of the really great things about the formation of larger integrated school districts is that it's going to allow us to move forward with innovations and better practices around special education. The way we fund education has been a reimbursement model, which is the only model that really can work with tiny school districts. By having a larger school district, we hope we can move to a census or a model where we more broadly assign funds to school districts and allow them greater flexibility in how they deal with special education in their community, leading to best practices and so better outcomes for children and cost containment for taxpayers. So that's an exciting bill that's moving through the legislature now. It's passed the House and we're working on it in the Senate. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. More questions? Yes.
Yeah, my name's Tom Banacor. I'm from Bridport. I just wanted to support what Mark was saying about the required agricultural practices. I think there's a huge disconnect between agency people who are going to be administering these rules or enforcing these rules and the farmers on the management side. I don't see very much in the way of connection between the two, although I know that the farmers are organizing and reaching out and trying to be involved. At the same time, I really don't see how it's going to work out the way it's been drawn in legislation. Even in terms of management, you know, where are the actual management practices that are going to encourage the farms to capture phosphorus? If that's the main thing, if that's the main goal, phosphorus and nitrogen control, you know, where are the practices that are really going to achieve that? I don't see it in the required management practices, the ones that they're calling the RAPs, the required agricultural practices. I've gone out to the farms. I actually met Mark out in Addison. I'm like a traveling salesman for trying to introduce some materials that would help farmers capture nitrogen and phosphorus. These are proven materials. They're basic gypsum and humates that go out on the fields. Mark looked at me like I was, you know, from the moon or something, because these are things that the organic farmers and other growers in other parts of the country who are dealing with this same issue and have been dealing with it for 20 years are employing successfully. We had meetings with NRCS, up at the NRCS USDA office. The state sent one fellow who was a low-level liaison. He had a nice little card, but he had no idea about farming, as far as I could tell. He no experience. And he asked me, you know, if these things actually worked. I had the national program manager from a large Fortune 500 company who's created a small division, and some of the materials they're producing are tailored exactly towards this issue. And, you know, we sent him a whole ream of studies. These are proven studies, field trials. And the guy never even responded. I mean, he never even commented, like, not even courtesy in terms of, you know, or do these things work? That's an academic question to a practical issue. And I think there's going to be some serious problems, you know, both in terms of how the farmers are going to relate to these practices, and then also how the agency of ag or whoever's responsible for enforcing them are going to relate to the farmers. And that's the last thing you want. You don't want division over arguably what is the most important aspect of, you know, Vermont is land use and land management. So that's all I have to say. I mean, if anybody has any comments, I'll be around after the show.
Other comments? Mark?
There's a rule of analysis that says that every problem has at least one solution worse than the original problem. Regulations do not induce anybody to do anything. They just draw a line and prohibit, and they have the consequences that you don't want. What we have is certain things that have been proven to work. Education, research, an assistance. That's what the old soil conservation used to use. That's what you have with the Extension Service doing the soil health programs and the incentives that the state gives for cover cropping so people can farm this without taking a high risk. Those things have been proven to be technologies that work, whereas regulations have an unintended consequence. And that's what I am encountering with the state regulators on this, is they are intent on what they have read in school, have been told that these are the technologies with, as he was pointing out, no understanding of the underlying issues or how they apply. I just want some rationality to be applied to this system with these new rules they're developing. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes.
This is the other Bowman. The other thing is, and Paul, the other thing is to realize that the way some of the farmers are looking at this right now, that if you want to keep on regulating and regulating and regulating farmers and using the whip with very few carrots, then maybe they might get discouraged and they may say, you want to run a farm? Why don't you buy it and run it yourself? You know, that would be kind of an interesting situation to see how the legislature and the Public Service Board and all these other boards would run a farm. I wonder how it would run.
Hi, Andrew Pizzullo from Middlebury. I'd just like to give a little bit of a different perspective on the issue. I mean, I'm all for farming, maybe you can tell. But anyway, I have a sailboat, spend a lot of time on Lake Champlain, and I know for 40 years, every year for 40 years, we're going to clean up the lake, we're going to clean up the lake. Well, I have to tell you, my wife jumps right in. And as tempting as it is when she says, come on in, the water is fine. All right, I look at the cows over in the field. I look at the color of the water, and I say to myself, the water is the same color as, well, never mind, right? It's terrible. It seems to be getting worse. Please, if you're going to clean up the lake, you got to do something soon.
And that's not to say that the problem is all farmers. I just want to make sure you understand that's only a teeny tiny piece of it. Yes.
I'd like to follow up on my earlier, on the answer that I got, which was, I felt a little more dismissive than substantive. I went back and checked, and the draft that was voted on in the morning that would have lowered the penalties was actually released the night before, the afternoon before, at 4:16 p.m. I have it time-stamped here in my folder. But regardless of whether you had 15 minutes or 16 hours to review the draft before the vote, I guess the substantive question is, do you stand by that vote now? Do you think that it's appropriate that growing 25 marijuana plants carries the same penalty as manslaughter? Do you think it's appropriate that we treat this as a major, major crime? How would you vote today? You've had all weekend now to read the bill.
Eddie, do you care to answer?
Right from the beginning in November, I made a decision. I was not going to vote for a marijuana bill. I looked at, and we had testimony, on H-241. The testimony from the police, one policeman after other, local, state, sheriffs, and leaders, chiefs, all said no marijuana and nothing in the house that you do in the home because we can't control it. We heard from the health department that it was bad, and children's minds are growing up to age 24. And that when you have marijuana as opposed to other things, marijuana affects the brain. and I forget the name of the particular part of the brain that it affects, but it decreases your interest in going on to be a doctor and decreases your interest in being more educated and getting money and a lot of other things, so that they become depressed, and they now have jobs, and you all are going to pay to take care of all those children. And they said, talked against it. So it is not something that I was ready for. I mean, I was ready for it, but I was not ready to vote for it. And I never have said that I was going to vote for the marijuana bill. And I haven't. I have kept my word.
Okay. Are there other questions? I know that our representative from Virgins has come in, didn't get a chance to say anything, but you're our representative on appropriations. What is the Appropriations Committee doing? Have all the bills been passed and you're ready to go home?
Thank you, Representative Diane Lanford, on this opportunity to say hi. I did get here a little bit late. I represent Addison 3, Ferrisburg, Virgins, Panton, Waltham, and Addison. And Tim said I sit on the House Appropriations Committee. So what are we doing now? Well, we listen to other bills, and we also go back and take an even deeper dive into some of the areas where we had some continuing questions around topics. This past week, we heard 3 hours of testimony from DCF because we supported in a child protection package all around between DCF, state's attorneys, defender generals, the court system, to try to strengthen up that system in response to the opiate crisis. And we felt that just putting in a penny when you need to put in a dime on this wasn't going to get it done. So we heard 3 hours from DCF on just exactly some of what goes on in their world. We also heard testimony from water quality. Funny that we're talking about that today. It's a very important topic. Some of the things that are happening in northern Bennington and other issues around water quality beyond some of the things that are happening with our lake and our air quality. The other thing that we're taking up now is you'll see some bills coming to the floor, like a really, really good bill that came out of economic development. And I got here late, and Representative Baser may have already spoke on this, but did a terrific job on a bill that came out of Commerce this week that there was included money in it. So we had set aside money on bills that we had heard that are now coming to the floor. So we have an active part in that as well. And welcome any questions, or if anybody wants to talk about it.
And while you're there, the big bill is over in the Senate now.
Correct.
And what's their progress?
Well, you know, we try to keep track of it, and I know that the Senate Appropriations Committee doesn't have quite as long a time period with the budget that the House does, and they've had a couple members out ill, and I know that a really, really long time and valued Senator Diane Snelling had taken an appointment with another job, and they're in the course of replacing that. So they're taking testimony. We try to pay attention, but I've got to tell you that hanging around outside their door, I wish I could just be a fly on their wall, is probably not really good protocol.
Okay, but we usually consider it to be the timing. Once the Senate gets rid of that bill, you can go home, right?
Well, no, not exactly yet. Just because the Senate has finished with it doesn't mean it's done. I'm sure that they will add their thumbprints to many of it. And some of the topics within there, we do try to work in harmony with things that need to be taken care of, that we have conversations around. But I'm sure there'll probably be a committee of conference to sort of go through the differences, make sure that both the House and the Senate can come to agreements on things. So that'll probably be out in the next couple of weeks, and we spend a week or so at the committee of conference. The budget is the last bill out, and then we can adjourn for the year. But we've got my committee has about a 2-week window right now to maybe focus on a few other things, and then we'll be into the committee of conference.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions, comments? Senator Bray.
A different topic, and to follow up on water and toxics. So I think Vermonters expect the state to help them look out for water quality in terms of making sure that every Vermonter has access to clean, healthy drinking water. A couple times already people have mentioned the situation in North Bennington in which a manufacturing chemical, PFOA, was found in wells and a municipal water supply. So I'm actually going to be going back to Montpelier. We're meeting this afternoon. We're working on a bill that should be out within a day. And it does a number of things to help address security issues around clean drinking water. The first is that it creates a well water testing program. And we passed something like this roughly 4 years ago. It was vetoed by the governor. We've looked into it again. We still think it's a very good idea. And we've taken testimony from realtors as well. It's often a requirement that a bank that's lending on a house will want to make sure that water is good. Government programs that participate in subsidizing mortgage rates. All the way around, there was broad support for making sure that when you buy a house or have a new well drilled, that you can count on the quality of that water, that it will be safe drinking water. Second thing is on the North Bennington situation, it turned out the manufacturer that's likely, and it's still only likely the source of the contamination, has been a very cooperative company. But had they not been, the state didn't have any tools other than suing them in order to get access to information. So we are creating a new law that allows for, without proceeding to the level of a suit, to collect information from a manufacturer or anyone that's the site of a release or an imminent release. So it's just better information so that the state can respond in a timely manner on an issue of real importance. And the third thing is that we are creating a working group with industry and the state to look into how do we get ahead of these things. So the sad pattern that we see over and over again is usually when something like this comes up, it's in response, we're reacting to some kind of problem that's already happened. And we would like to turn that around and work, the well water testing is a piece of it, but we would like to turn the paradigm around and try to get ahead of these situations. I'd compare the difference between when a drug is approved by the FDA and how the EPA handles chemicals that may be toxic. A drug isn't allowed into the marketplace until you've done testing that proves that it is safe for people to be around or to use. But chemicals are allowed into the environment with no such testing ahead of time. And sadly, what happens is that the reason a chemical is withdrawn is that over time, enough people become sick enough from enough exposure that we learn that this was an unsafe chemical, and then it's withdrawn. So we would like to change the story there and not have to wait for people to get ill before we can act to ensure we have clean water.
I'd like to go back to the water quality, required agricultural practices, and just note that it didn't fall on deaf ears. I'm hearing what you're saying, and I appreciate it. I think last week, maybe it was the week before, we got testimony from the Agency of Ag on the process and how they felt it was going. So it's great to be in Addison County and get some feedback on how people here feel like it's going, and then figure out a process forward for it. I haven't been involved in the RAP process in detail, but we are following it kind of at the higher level. The agency feels quite proud of the outreach they've done around it, and that they feel like they've done a lot of education in the process. And they chose to take a path forward of looking at the draft, putting out a draft, an unofficial draft, and taking lots of feedback on it. And the official draft is now going to be posted and the official process will begin. It does mean that you can have more feedback, more input in that. And I guess I would say that if I'm happy to take the conversation offline and hear more about your ideas for water quality and the tension between land use, water quality. I mean, we need to clean up the lake while maintaining obviously our healthy agricultural economy. So any ideas are still welcome, even though the bill is underway. It's an imperfect bill, but we did need to move something forward to try to clean up our waters.
Has there been a move to extend the time? I know the Ag Agency was asking for an extension because they didn't feel they could meet the deadlines.
Right, so as my committee chair likes to say, you can't go to jail for not meeting a deadline. So we did accommodate their request for the extension. It made sense. It passed the straight face test in terms of where farmers are in their calendar. It's our intention to hold this new calendar to a hard date as best we can. So yeah, it got an extension, I think, until September. It was going to be this spring, but it would have been past planting, and so it didn't really make sense if they felt like they did make a case for having done very good outreach and education efforts with, over 1,000 farmers. So they did a lot of work in a short amount of time.
Heidi?
So Heidi Willis again from Salisbury, and just a general comment and then a question for Amy. But in terms of rules and regulations, we can expect as our population is increasing, and so we rub up against each other more and more frequently and more intensely. And if we don't have rules and regulations, then those rubbing ups against each other would be conflicts even greater than they are now. So as our population grows, I think we can expect, and if it grows, it probably shouldn't, but we can expect that there will be more rules and regulations to help us live together. And then changing, still on water quality, but I'm curious where the forest bills are in terms of regulation, connectivity, that kind of thing. So,
Senator?
So the other reason I'm going back today is for an extra meeting is because we have a whole suite of forestry bills. So a major bill started in the Senate. We put it on pause. The House took it up, did their own work on it, and there are now, I'd say, a total of 7 bills all related to forestry practices that have come back over to the Senate side. We've been meeting on them for weeks, and this week we will come to conclusions about those bills and reconcile. We don't want 7 separate bills, so we'll be fitting them back together and distilling things down. And by Friday we'll have next legislative breakfast. I can report what happened with forestry. But in general, we look to supporting forestry while also having an eye on how to do planning in a way that keeps forests, keeps forests, as Commissioner Snyder likes to say, and also has an eye on water quality, because forests are the major source of clean drinking water for all Vermonters.
More questions? If not, I'll ask a question about the healthcare exchange. I understand there was an audit recently, and we spent another $400,000 of our hard-earned tax dollars on auditing the healthcare exchange. Where is that now?
The national audit that was done showed a number of state exchanges had security issues, and that's the first thing I wanted to tell you about. And ours were fixed. When that audit, by the time that audit became public, we had already recognized that in the state of Vermont, so that's not an issue. We are still deciding. The administration, that means the governor and the people who work for him, did a study on the exchange and determined that we should sort of stick with the bare bones of the exchange, not try to ramp it up to do all the things we'd hoped we would do with it, and not throw away all that money. There's some doubt in the legislature that that's really the right course, and we'll be asking for a more independent audit, an audit by numbers people, to come to another to see if we come to another conclusion. The option mentioned by some people is go to the federal exchange. In the federal exchange, Vermonters who now get an extra subsidy for their health care insurance as paid for by the state of Vermont would not be able to do that. That's a big loss right there. So this, we'll be asking for an audit by an outside group and our own joint fiscal committee to determine where the best math is for Vermonters and their health care.
So stay tuned. We have to stay tuned to find out what's going to happen. Other questions or comments, Dave?
So Vermont Health Connect and our healthcare system has to be the biggest frustration that I've experienced in my tenure at the State House. Healthcare costs continue to drive every budget. This year, I think it was $30 million in Medicaid. That number may be off a little bit here or there. Diane can probably dial in more specific numbers. But it also affects every school budget in the state. The costs of healthcare are just driving us into the ground, and our feeble attempts to address this issue through universal health care and Vermont Health Connect have been extraordinarily frustrating for me. We just passed a bill last week that authorized the expenditure of $400,000 for an additional audit to look at the best way to move forward. That bill moves over to the Senate, and they get to deal with it. I would remind people that the same corporation that designed Vermont Health Connect also designed the federal program. And I don't think that there has been widespread criticism of this move towards electronic access to health care across the country. Vermont is not alone, and it's been extraordinarily frustrating.
Diane?
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Yes, but for Medicaid, which was probably the largest driver in the increase on what was going on in the budget this past year. But I think we've wrestled with that, and I think some of the positives that I can come away this year with, and I want people to remember, we're at 97% covered for in the state of Vermont. So my hope is that we only have like 3% left of Vermonters that don't have insurance at the moment. So some of the rules changed that drove up that Medicaid cost. On the good side, utilization is down. So the people with Medicaid are actually using it less. But the caseload, the people increasing, has gone up dramatically. And one of the drivers on that, not the sole driver, but one of the sole drivers, is some of the federal law changes as to who can qualify for Medicaid is now different. It's not what it was in the past. And what I'm referring to, as you may have heard me speak of this before, is the MAGI. The federal rule on what is considered income and how that's measured has changed. So a person's assets now are not counted, and I won't go on and on for that a long time, but what this does is it impacts a lot of what we call independent people who are carpenters, people who are farmers, who own a lot of property, who have a lot of assets maybe within their business that look on paper like as if they have a lot of money, but their income is not there, now qualify in a new way for Medicaid. When they go to the exchange to log in, and where some people would have normally had gotten a subsidy in the past, now can qualify, and they go over in this column. That's the caseload that has gone up pretty dramatically at a higher cost. Choices for care is another. Our elderly, our disabled. Within my budget, I have the largest portion of Dale, which is within, and in that budget alone, it's $453 million around disabled and elderly in that environment. And the caseload in those environments have gone up in this past year. That was an $8 million increase just in that world alone. So I welcome any other questions on that, and I hope I added some value to the conversation. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I got one question on that, and I don't know if this is true or not, or I heard it, but I heard that they stripped out all dental care out of the bill. Is that true or not, especially the preventive dental care? And I ask that because the cardiac rate goes down between 20 and 30% with proper dental care. I know it seems like it's up at the ends of the body, but statistics have shown and studies have shown that good routine dental care lowers your cardiac rate. So I'm wondering, was that stripped out, and if so, why?
Thank you, Paul. In the when you look at Vermont compared to like the New England states and a little bit beyond, and what we actually say yes to in our coverages, we're very, very generous. And the answer to your question is no. Did we look at it? Did we look at all of the things that we have as benefits as Vermonters and say, is there somewhere in here that maybe we could save money and close instead of needing to have to raise money? So we went through those. Did we look at it? Yes. Do we ask questions around it? Of course we did. But in the end, we did not take it away from in the Medicaid.
Okay. One last comment, Fred?
Thank you. I think it is a good thing that Vermont has such a low uninsured rate. I think having our citizens insured is great. I guess I'm going to be a bit of a contrarian, however, on the Medicaid piece. I don't think that when we took actions as a body, that good thought was given to the consequences of all the actions that were taken by the administration. Medicaid now covers about 1/3 of all Vermonters. The reimbursement to our providers is far less than what they get for other medical issues. The state, I think Medicaid spending is up to $1.2 billion. It's the second largest single expense we have in government. And this year, and some of you will notice, taxes, fees will go up because of the medical expenses that we've incurred that we didn't plan for and didn't cover. And I think this is going to be a continuing problem. Somehow, I'm hoping with new administration and new leadership in the House and the Senate, we can get our arms around the health care issue so that we can continue to do a good job of covering our citizenry, especially those that are less fortunate economically. But we also don't end up transferring a lot of the burden to this to doctors. And of course, we have a serious situation here in Addison County relative to Porter. Not all of it brought upon by the administration there, but some of it brought upon by the fact that physicians aren't getting paid enough, and the hospital receipts were stressed because of the Medicaid folks that they had. So we have state pressures, we have pressures on the provider community, and I don't think we have a handle at all in Montpelier as how to address these problems satisfactorily and in a way that Vermonters can afford. And I'm critical of it. Healthcare isn't my bailiwick, so I can't speak to specifics, but as someone from arm's length and someone that's responsible for you all up in Montpelier, I'm very, very concerned about the path that we're on, and I hope very much that new leadership might bring some clarity to this so we can both achieve the goal of ensuring people that need it and at the same time be able to afford it, and have our practitioners also be able to afford to stay here.
Thank you, Fred. And that's the last word. We appreciate you all coming out for our weekly breakfast. Let me let you know that next week is the last in the series of weekly breakfasts. We're going to skip over, let the legislature finish up, and come back in June. Next week we'll be at St. Peter's Parish Hall in Vergennes, and that'll be the last of the Monday morning legislative breakfasts, brought to you each week by the Bridport Grange, the Addison County Farm Bureau, with help from the Chamber of Commerce and Addison County Economic Development. And we appreciate you coming out for these meetings, and hope that you'll let all your friends know that next week is the last week of regular Monday morning breakfasts. Thank you for coming. Don't forget, there's a donation jar out there, and on your way out, help us out in any way you can. Thank you.